So some basic positioning principles that are going to help us, again, when we get into understanding trauma, when we get into understanding pediatric radiography, some of these basic positioning principles are just universal for every type of exam. So, they're showing you an exam here, right? This is not that important that everyone knows what the exam is, but can someone tell me what projection this is? Yeah, forearm, right? Where's the central ray centered to, right? It's the forearm, right? It's a lateral forearm projection. Notice I did not say a lateral forearm view, although if I did, I shouldn't be, drawn and quartered for it, right? It's okay, right? Just don't use view as a technical term. Good. Things to think about in every exam, though. This is not specific to a lateral forearm. This is every exam. All pertinent anatomy should be demonstrated, right? Such as when you're x-raying a body part like a long bone, right? Like the forearm, the radius and ulna of the forearm. What's pertinent? What anatomy matters for the forearm? So what bony anatomy matters for the forearm? What is the forearm mostly made of, Francisco? Sure. I just said them if that helps. Radius, right? So show the entirety of both of those bones, okay? At this end, the proximal end of the forearm, what is the name of this joint? It's not hard, it's the elbow, right? Okay, guys. I'm not trying to trick you, I promise you, okay? I'm not trying to trick anybody. All right, so this is our elbow, right? So show the radius and ulna, including the elbow joint, okay? What's down at this end? What do you call this thing that my watch is strapped around? My wrist, right? So show the wrist, okay? Show the radius and ulna, including the wrist, right? Including the elbow. That's pertinent anatomy, okay? I'm just going to draw a line right through that. We'll just strike that right off of there. So in general, we don't put multiple images on a single image receptor. That's an old idea from film radiography to save money, okay? With film radiography, you had to pay per piece of film, right? It might be $1 or $3 for every piece of film, right? So if you want to save money in an imaging department with film, you just used less film, okay? With digital radiography, as we just learned in our previous module, our cassettes can be reused thousands of times, right? 5,000 times or more potentially. So technically each image costs something, right? But it's not a lot. It might be, if you really did it out, if you had $1,000 imaging plate, right, and you got to use it 3,000 times, right? It's roughly 30 cents an image, something like that, right? So I mean, each image costs money, but it's way less than film costs, okay? Good. So, but we don't put multiple images on an image receptor when we can avoid it. There are certain times. Those of you who are at clinic right now doing X-rays, can you give me an example of a body part that you would put multiple positions on one receptor? Is there any examples that you've seen? No? No one's ever done multiple images on a single receptor?
Bilateral knees.
Knees are a good example. Standing or supine? Standing knees. Yeah, because you're doing orthopedics, right? Yeah. So yeah, they're going to do some different stuff definitely in orthopedics, and things like doing bilateral knees, standing, right? So they can see what the weight-bearing difference is between the knees, right? See the degenerative disease of the knee. Fingers and wrists and toes and in some cases feet can be put on multiple images to a receptor. But there's no practical reason to do it anymore, okay? In fact, it's something I didn't get a chance really to teach you guys in digital that I still need to talk about, is you can actually confuse the digital processor. If you put multiple images on a receptor, the processor is programmed to recognize a single image centered to the image receptor, right? If you have 3 images spread across the image receptor, it actually might have trouble recognizing images, and that can change the processing steps that it takes and change how the image actually appears. So we avoid it when possible with digital radiography. Next, collimation. Collimation's a technical term. What does it mean? What does the word collimation mean?
Make like smaller.
Good. What are you making smaller? What are you changing the size of?
The
Yes and no, right? So Parrish is not wrong when she says the light field, but the light field is representing what? What thing is the light field showing you? Not the projection. What is the X-ray tube making? An X-ray beam, right? You're right. So it's photons, right? So it's a big stream of X-rays, right? And we need to change the size of what we would call our radiation field. Okay. So collimation is changing the size of your radiation field. Okay. Underneath the X-ray tube. So if we go back to the projection image, just to use it, right? You zoom in. You'll notice that box, that white box with the knobs on it attached to the ceiling gantry, that's called a collimator box. In this image, to the left of that box, so attached right here, that's the X-ray tube, right? That's where the X-rays are coming from. That box is not making any X-rays, okay? That box simply has a light inside of it, okay? And importantly, has a series of lead strips that move this way and that way. Those knobs are connected to those lead strips, and when you move those knobs, they change the size of the square or rectangle that the X-ray beam can pass through. Okay, effectively controlling the size of the radiation field. So you'll notice that these two images here have been collimated, shown by the light here, right, representing where the radiation field will be. Okay. Let me go back down to where I was at. We need our radiation field to be large enough that it shows all pertinent anatomy. Okay. We do not need our radiation field to be larger than that, right? And there's a rule that we'll learn in radiation safety, but I'll just say it right now. Your radiation field can never, by law, be larger than your image receptor. So that's a 14 by 17 inch image receptor there, that black receptor down below. And if the radiation field was 15 by 18 inches, that is unlawful, right? You're not supposed to have your receptor field larger than your receptor because that's just extra exposure to the patient that they don't need to have, right? The difference in exposure, this is a pretty big number here. The difference in exposure from outside to inside the radiation field on the patient is something like 100-fold. They get something like 100 times more radiation inside that light field than they do outside the light field. Okay. Now it's very small amounts of radiation they're getting to begin with, but the point is, when you collimate, you control how much radiation your patient is receiving, right? As well as you're controlling what body parts are demonstrated, what anatomy is demonstrated. This is going to really matter for pediatric radiography, right? Because they're small, children are smaller, and your image receptors are often larger than they need to be for the child, okay? And if you just leave the radiation field wide open, you're irradiating somebody way more than they need to. And something we'll learn in radiation safety is that, you may intuitively know this, that children are more susceptible to damage from radiation than adults are, okay? The younger you are, the more active your cells are, and the more likely they are to have problems with it when exposed to radiation. So with child pediatric radiography, that's going to definitely matter, okay? Showing the pertinent anatomy, but not showing more than you need to, okay? So in general, we always want to show at least 2 sides of a collimated field on the image. And when we can show 4 sides, like this shows, that you can see all 4 edges of the collimated field inside the receptor, that's ideal, okay? There are times when that can't happen, such as adults and chest x-rays, right? Often you can't make the field smaller because our chests are about the exact size of the image receptor, right? And in other cases, that's not true. But collimation is extremely important. Positioning accuracy involves putting the body part in the correct position to demonstrate the pertinent anatomy in the way it's supposed to be demonstrated. For example, you got to have the body part itself in the correct position, which means in the case of the lateral forearm, right, they put their forearm on lateral, and importantly, their thumb is up. Okay, with the thumb down, the palm pronated, that changes the position of the bones in the arm, right? And we're going to get different demonstration of different anatomy when we pronate the hand versus putting the hand in the true lateral position. So having the correct amount of rotation for the body part is going to affect what you see. Lastly, central ray. All right, so there's lots to talk about with the central ray, but one of my not brand new students, what is the central ray? Some people have never heard of that word before, so what's the central ray? What's it mean to you? RV, what's the central ray?
Actually, that's going straight down.
Yeah,
Basically.
yeah. Think about your car headlights or a flashlight, right? When you shine a flashlight on a wall, the middle of the flashlight's beam is traveling straight at the wall. As long as you're pointing so assume you're pointing the flashlight straight at the wall, right? The middle of that flashlight's beam is straight, not traveling at any weird angles, but the rest of that flashlight's beam spreads out, travels at an angle, right? Your car headlights do the same thing. The beam spreads out as it travels away from the headlight. The same thing is true of the X-ray beam. Now, I'm hesitant to get out my flashlight right now and show you guys the flashlight stuff, the flashlight move. But the point is, the middle of the X-ray beam is going to show the anatomy the best, right? It's going to have the least amount of shape and size distortion, okay? Recall that distortion is misrepresenting the size or shape of a body part, right? The center of the beam has the least amount of distortion. We always place the center of the beam in the center of the anatomy to be demonstrated, so that we have the least amount of distortion shown when we project that anatomy. So central ray becomes important for that reason. Central ray is also the most powerful part of the beam. It's the most penetrating part of the beam. So you, in general, always want to put that in the center of the anatomy. Good. So the position has been done. We thought about all these things as we were positioning, and then we had a radiograph to view from that, right? So there's our lateral forearm radiograph. Let me be very clear. The forearm is placed on the screen incorrectly, okay? Normally the forearm should be placed on the screen horizontally, but I will not even worry about that for right now. They did it so they could fit it on the slide. But check it out. So we had the position. We thought about all those things. They demonstrated all the anatomy. Okay, they included the elbow joint, they included the wrist, so both joints, the joint on either end of that long bone, those long bones are included. No rotation at the wrist and the elbow. You see that, so it's sort of technical, but you see that because the distal radius and ulna, here, there's the ulna, there's the radius, are superimposed on each other. One is not moved over in relationship to the other. Okay. We go to the elbow joint, technical terms, but the coronoid process of the ulna is shown in profile. I can see the radial head in profile. I can tell there's no rotation based on that. So no rotation at the elbow and wrist joint. Optimal exposure factors. All right, so my more senior students, tell me, what do they mean by optimal exposure factors? What are we looking for with this radiograph? I'll just zoom in as much as I'm able on the bony anatomy. What do you need to see to know that you have optimal exposure factors? Parrish, what do you think? What's one thing you're looking at?
Soft tissue.
So we got some soft tissue. Okay. We've got some black background, right? So we want black background. We want soft tissue. What about regarding the bony anatomy? What are you looking at? Maria, what are you looking at for bony anatomy?
I forgot what it's called, but it's basically like the shadings.
Yeah,
I
so
don't know what it's called.
I've got the bright white bony cortex, all of that white on the outer layer of the bone. That's the bone's cortex, right? The hard outer layers of the bone. So bright white bony cortex. And then within the bone, shown better at either ends of the extremity, is this sort of patterning to the bone here. Okay, so bone is not just white, right? Bone doesn't show white on X-ray. It's shown in different shades. This is called trabecular markings, or trabecular pattern, or trabeculae. when you crack a bone, look into bone, you get to see this sort of spongy pattern in the bone. Okay, that's what's seen on X-ray. And so I look for all those things. I look for black background. I look for soft tissue. I look for bright white bony cortex. I look for trabecular patterning, and I know that I have the right exposure if I can see all of those things on, specifically this X-ray. So we're looking for those things. Lastly, image markers, right? Telling us which side of the body it is. Is it a right or a left side of the body? Now this looks like a digital marker. We're going to try in all cases when we're able to use our hard markers that actually sit on the receptor with the patient's body part. Okay. So with that stuff said,